Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. Susan Rice, Barack Obama's former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and National Security Advisor, was in Charleston this week on her book tour for her new book, Tough Love, a book about her time in the public eye. In her new book, Tough Love, Ambassador Susan Rice recounts stories of growing up in Washington and working to meet high standards set by her parents, standards that propelled her to Stanford University and to a public service career on the National Security Council and at the State Department in the Clinton administration, and was taken on as Obama's ambassador to the United Nations in 2009. In 2012, she came under intense fire from lawmakers and the public after she appeared on several news shows to discuss preliminary information about the Benghazi attacks that left 4 Americans dead. Findings of the 8 congressional investigations found she did not intentionally mislead the public. Following Obama's re-election, she moved from the United Nations to become Obama's National Security Advisor in 2013, through the remainder of his term. The high-profile position meant Rice was involved in practically every major national security decision Obama made. Tough Love, My Story of Things Worth Fighting For is a candid portrait of Rice's personal and professional life, with behind-the-scenes views of international diplomacy during crisis and peace. And we're here at the Hotel Bennett in Charleston with Ambassador Susan Rice. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Perfect. And now you're in town because you're on your book tour. We have a couple more stops on your book tour talking about your book, Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. Tough Love, you've had a lifetime of tough love, both professionally, personally. Tell us why that title and how tough love has shaped you in your career.
Well, tough love to me means loving fiercely but not uncritically. In other words, when you love somebody, you love them enough to tell them the truth, and sometimes the hard truths. And that's how my parents raised me and my brother. That's how I've tried to raise my kids with my husband. And it's also how I've tried to lead teams and serve our country. I love this country fiercely and passionately, but I do think there are ways in which we can improve and do better. And my view of what a public servant should be is being somebody who's committed to working to make it better. And so tough love really encompasses my personal life, my professional life, and it's a really apt summation of what I share, because this book is both very personal and also about my time in service.
And your father gave you some good advice too. Don't take crap off of anyone. And your father was born in Florence, South Carolina, spent time raised in Sumter, South Carolina, before moving to New York. World War II vet, a very accomplished man. Just tell me a little bit about what that phrase, don't take crap off of anybody, meant to you. Because you've had to work, you've worked in a male-dominated field. I mean, you even go quite candidly about, as you were a mother, when you were Secretary of African Affairs at State, how you had your children with you every now and then. What's it like to have to embody that and kind of persevere through that world?
Well, I want to tell you a little bit about my dad, but
yeah.
He taught me and my brother to believe in ourselves and to have confidence and to recognize that there will be people who try to dismiss us or denigrate us or bully us. And his strong advice was, don't take crap off of anybody. Don't let anybody put you down. And if they try to, push back. He also would encourage us not to start anything with anybody, but if they come at us, part of being strong and being respected is not being bullied. So that's what he meant by don't take crap off of anybody. But to understand where that comes from, you need to understand a little bit about him. So my father was born in South Carolina here, grew up in Sumter. His dad was a Methodist minister at Mount Pisgah AME in Sumter. And my great-grandfather was born a slave here in South Carolina. And he fought in the Union Army here in South Carolina during the Civil War. There was an officer who gave him the opportunity to get an education, and so he got his primary education up in Massachusetts. He came back to South Carolina and was a teacher during Reconstruction, but he was driven out of the South by the Klan. He moved to New Jersey and got his college degree at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And with a college degree and a background in teaching and the ministry, he established a school in New Jersey called the Bordentown School in the late 1880s. And up until the 1950s, that school educated generations and generations of African Americans, both in vocational and technical skills and in college preparatory skills. So my father came from a line of educated people of service. He himself decided that the ministry was not for him. He served with the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II, and then went on to get his PhD in economics from the University of California at Berkeley, and was a economics professor for a while. He was a commercial banker. He ultimately was a governor of the Federal Reserve. And from his experience, being born and raised in the heart of Jim Crow and segregation here in South Carolina, and the height of lynching, quite frankly, he developed a resilience and a persistence to achieve his goals and to believe in himself. And that's what he aimed to teach me and my brother, and that's where don't take crap off of anybody comes from.
And they told you you have to work twice as hard as the other kids at school. I mean, you went to a very prestigious school in Washington, D.C., you graduated valedictorian, went to Stanford. It seems like your hard-charging, mentality and your approach to a lot of things is really, I mean, it drove you a lot. I mean, to the point where you had colleagues at State saying, hey, try and make it, throttle back a little bit and try and be a little bit more.
Well, these are
personal.
Different stages of my life.
Of course.
You're
But
matching up
everything
a lot
influences
here.
each other, of course.
So my mother was also a remarkable woman, who was a very successful professional. But my parents taught me that we were blessed. They had come from little and made the most of the educational opportunities given to them. By the time my brother and I came along, my parents had the means to enable us to have a first-rate education, and that that gave us added responsibility to give back and to serve. That was how I was raised. And so hard charging, I was told to do my best and to recognize that as an African American woman, born in the 60s and 70s, born in the 60s, raised in the 70s, that I did have to be twice as good, to be viewed as half as good in comparison to many of my peers. And so that's how I was raised. I worked very hard. I was thankfully blessed with the skills to be a good student. And that perseverance and ambition carried with me through my early stages of my career. I was, at age 32, named Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs in the second term of the Clinton administration. And at that point, I was the youngest, actually still am, the youngest regional Assistant Secretary of State, meaning responsible for like Asia, Africa, Europe. And so the people reporting to me, the ambassadors and senior officials, were typically 20 to 30 years my senior, mostly male, mostly white, mostly career foreign service officers. And so early in my tenure at the State Department, as I write in Tough Love, I had to figure out how to be persistent and have a vision and push our team to get results, and yet at the same time, bring a team along and not be alienating to them. And I, as I say forthrightly in the book, that was a struggle for me initially, and then with some very generous advice from friends and colleagues, and then just some trial and error and maturation, I think I got the hang of it.
And just fast forward a little bit to this past week. I know this is going to air on Friday nights. We're interviewing on Monday, but the week before we did see ambassadors, career statesmen going before the impeachment inquiry. You had ambassadors reporting to you when you were at State. I'm just wondering, when you see what we're seeing right now going on in Congress with this impeachment hearing, what's it like to have to see something like this happen in terms of, do we feel like America's best interests are at heart here in terms of what we're seeing being played out when you have, the president saying one thing about a, career foreign service officer or ambassador? What's it like from your perspective, and how do you interpret this, knowing that you had people like these people working under you?
As my colleagues. And I myself was an ambassador at the UN for a period of time thereafter. I think what people need to understand is that these are dedicated, loyal, hardworking, deeply experienced public servants. The foreign service officers are apolitical. They serve loyally and consistently under presidents who are Democratic and Republican. They don't ever talk about their political perspectives. I couldn't tell you the politics of any of the career foreign service officers I worked with over the course of 2 administrations. They take an oath to the Constitution, and they take that oath very seriously. They serve in very dangerous places. I've lost colleagues in embassy bombings in East Africa and in Libya. They are every day at risk, and people don't appreciate the risks that they take. We do thankfully appreciate the risks that our servicemen and women take, but our career foreign service officers and civil servants and our career intelligence personnel are also taking extraordinary risks every day. These people aren't asking for glory. None of them ever want to be in the public spotlight. For them to come forward and put a bullseye on their back when, the person with the bow and arrow is in the White House is extremely risky and requires enormous dedication to their oath of office. So I think what people need to understand is none of them signed up to have to testify before Congress in an impeachment inquiry. But what they saw and what they experienced was so profoundly disturbing to them that they felt an obligation. And it is profoundly disturbing because what the evidence indicates is that the President of the United States used the power of his office, $400 million in badly needed military assistance that Congress had authorized, and the potential of a White House visit to extort out of the Ukrainian president not a change in policy that advanced U.S. interests, but a personal political favor. And that's deeply disturbing.
And you had former Ukraine ambassador Marie Yovanovitch saying, how could our system fail like this? How is it that foreign corrupt interests could manipulate our government? What do you think when you heard those words, saw that testimony?
I think they're very powerful. I don't know her personally. I know her by reputation. Her reputation is impeccable. And the point she's making is that if corrupt actors in Ukraine who didn't like the fact that she, as ambassador, and her colleagues at the embassy were pursuing as a matter of U.S. policy a strong anti-corruption agenda because it got in their way of doing whatever bad business they wanted to do. And then they can find a back channel through, appears to be Giuliani or whomever, to the President of the United States and have that ambassador removed. Then how can any of our ambassadors have the confidence that they can pursue the policies they were sent to pursue without being, manipulated or removed? So the point she was making is bad enough in Ukraine, but what does that say for, our ability to pursue our policies and interests around the world?
You had Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney saying, dealing with this tit for tat, essentially, that this is how we always done it. This is what we do. $400 million, we'll wait till you do what we want you to do. Is that how you guys did it in your White House?
No, I've served in 2 administrations, and I've watched very carefully the formulation and implementation of foreign policy across multiple administrations, Democratic and Republican. The fallacy in what Mr. Mulvaney said is that, yes, of course, prior administrations and prior presidents have used various instruments, carrots and sticks, to try to achieve policy outcomes that serve the U.S. interests, clear-cut policy outcomes that serve the U.S. interests. This was not a case of that. This was a case of using those levers to achieve personal political benefit for the President of the United States. That's fundamentally different and deeply dangerous. So that analogy that Mr. Mulvaney was trying to draw is completely misplaced.
We're talking about Ukraine, but when we look at our other allies, the president's talked about before trying to pull out of NATO. We've seen other situations where we're kind of blasting our allies. What message does that send to them? I mean, are they just hanging in there basically and hoping? Have they kind of developed a understanding about how things operate right now, or what kind of message do you think we're sending to our allies about how we're operating on the international stage right now?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is what makes us strong as the United States of America is not just the force of our military or the fact that we have the largest economy. It is that we have consistently, since World War II, been able to harness a global network of allies and partners that are committed to joining with us to advance shared objectives. So it's not just fighting the Soviet Union during the Cold War that NATO was valuable for. NATO was the first to join with us after we were attacked on 9/11 in Afghanistan. NATO countries joined with the United States very recently as we had to take the fight to ISIS in Iraq and Syria. NATO countries are with the United States as we have to put pressure on Russia for its annexation of Crimea and invasion of Ukraine. So these allies and partnerships are force multipliers for the United States. They make it less likely that we have to use military force and more likely that we can achieve our objectives, whether it's dealing with an adversary or fighting, a pandemic disease, when we have partners with us. So what President Trump has done that I think is so damaging to our interests is to say to our allies, look, we only view this relationship as one of a financial transaction. It's not based on values. It's not based on shared interests. And we're happy to undermine and denigrate those alliance relationships, which frankly benefits Russia, and then elevate and praise dictators like Putin, like Xi Jinping, like Erdogan, who's both an ally and an autocrat, like Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, like Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So we've kind of got things way upside down. In normal times, Democratic and Republican presidents have been clear about who our adversaries are and have embraced and supported our allies, and recognizing that those alliances serve our interests. And so I'm very concerned that we have delivered to our allies a message of our inconstancy, and it's causing them to doubt our ability to stand with them and them with us.
And one of our allies, the Kurds in northern Syria, we said, hey, we're going to pull out. We want to get these troops home. We didn't bring them home. They just got reassigned to Iraq, it sounds like. We have
or
more.
Apparently some of them to protect oil fields rather than
going
fight
back to
ISIS.
Iran, yeah. And then I'm just wondering, when we see that kind of stuff, what does that mean? Like, why, to the average person who's not following foreign affairs, why are we selling out our allies like that? Because even, Senator Lindsey Graham, I guess, you have your differences, but one of his he even came out against that, and he was pretty vocal about why we pulled out of there, because we had been working with the Kurds for so long. They were a force multiplier for a war that we really didn't want to get too involved in. So what is your take on why we decided to leave
Gavin,
Syria?
That's a great question. And the problem is there's no answer to it that anybody who knows anything about national security can point to that advances our interests. So we abandoned our allies, the Kurds. Over 10,000 of them, men and women, had given their lives to be the pointy end of the spear to fight ISIS on our behalf. They had been very effective in taking the battle to ISIS. We totally pulled the rug out from under them completely unexpectedly. Why? The effect of our decision, by the president's decision to withdraw, was to allow Turkey to come in and slaughter Kurds, take over territory that the Kurds had always considered to be their traditional homeland. Then from the south came the Russians and the Iranians. Now Russian flags are flying over U.S. bases. Why? Iran and Russia have benefited. ISIS has benefited. Turkey has benefited, and the Kurds have been cast to the side. Our constancy as a partner and ally questioned. And no aspect of this advances our security or our interests. So your question is absolutely the right question. Why? And I have, there's no clear-cut explanation that I can point to, that I've heard anybody else point to, that makes any sense.
Sticking with Senator Graham and President Trump, they blame you for the creation of ISIS. That's one thing that he's said. President Donald Trump has said that ISIS has been eradicated. We know that there's a bunch of ISIS prisoners over there in northern Syria that are now in questionable situations with, the Kurds no longer being in place, us not being over there anymore. I'm wondering, we're talking about why do they do this? What does the future look like? I mean, we're arguably less secure now if there's so many ISIS fighters that have been detained over there and we're no longer in place to keep an eye on them or have our allies keep an eye on them. Could we see a strong reemergence of ISIS?
I think it goes without saying that neither I nor any other American created ISIS. ISIS is a very dangerous reincarnation, in effect, of al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria. It's taken on new name, new leadership, new mission, but it's essentially an outgrowth. It is far more likely now, even after the killing of Baghdadi, which is obviously a positive thing, to reemerge. And indeed, I just saw recently a report, and I can't vouch for its accuracy, that Iraqi intelligence is now telling us that those ISIS prisoners that remain are trying to make a mass bust out of these prisons. And we ought to be very concerned that with the pressure that the Kurds were applying being removed because they have to worry about defending themselves against Turkey. And our forces being downsized, and now to the extent that they are anywhere, they're guarding oil installations rather than taking the fight to ISIS. That's extremely dangerous. We have seen in Afghanistan, in Iraq, elsewhere, ISIS's ability to bounce back. And nobody who knows this business should discount that. So it's a real concern.
I'm going to keep with Senator Graham because you called him a name on a podcast recently about, wasn't so nice, but obviously you had a lot of feelings toward him because of your situation with Benghazi in 2012. And I just want to get your thoughts, just your quick take. I know you have a whole chapter in Tough Love about Benghazi, explaining the situation. Can you tell for us just maybe how you kind of became, I don't know if scapegoat is the right word, but maybe the public face of that horrible terrorist attack?
Well, let me just say that, Senator Graham has called me a liar. He's called me incompetent and untrustworthy. He said many nasty things about me over the course of 7 years. And until very recently, I had said nothing. I chose some rather spicy language. I'm sure my late mother would agree with the sentiment, but not the words I chose. And she's up there saying, clean up your mouth. But frankly, it comes from years of experience. And, you just reminded everybody that just recently he accused me of being responsible for ISIS, for the Rwandan genocide, and a whole series of other ridiculous things. So, I do agree with him on certain aspects of foreign policy. I think he has been profoundly dishonest and unfair when it comes to me. And by the way, I want to just say, just for the sake of context, I'm a fan of the junior senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott. So this is not about partisan political differences. But going back to Benghazi, in 2012, I was the spokesperson that was asked by the White House to go on the Sunday show some days after the horrific terrorist attack in Benghazi that cost us our ambassador and 3 other Americans. I provided the best current information that our intelligence community had provided to me and to members of Congress on a declassified basis. It later turned out that certain aspects of that information were inaccurate. Most specifically, after all the information came in, it turns out that there wasn't a demonstration at our facility, outside of our facility in Benghazi. 8 congressional committees have investigated every aspect of Benghazi, including Trey Gowdy's lengthy investigation.
Our former congressman, yeah.
Yes. Every one of them concluded that nobody in the administration, neither I nor anybody else, deliberately misled the American people. So this was a case of the information being inaccurate, it changing, and nonetheless, in the height of a hot re-election campaign and a highly politicized environment, I was branded all these names that I won't repeat. That
Jim Clyburn even had to come to your rescue at some point, and because there were.
I don't know about my rescue, but he came to my defense, as he should, and expressed his absolute dismay that some of the attacks on me, in his view, had racial overtones, and he was particularly dismayed. He said, because it was a senator from South Carolina, my father's home state, coming at me in those terms. I have enormous respect for Congressman Clyburn as well, and gratitude towards him. But I think the point is that my name became associated in some part with what happened in Benghazi because of my appearance on those Sunday shows.
We have about 3 minutes left. There's so much to cover, but I do want to ask you, right now, looking at the international stage, what are some of the top worries that you have? Are they the same that they were when you were National Security Advisor for Barack Obama, President Obama, or have they changed, or are they about the same?
Well, they're same in some respects. We have to be worried about a very aggressive Russia and a rising China and a nuclear North Korea. And we have new climate change and a bunch of real challenges. But what I worry about honestly now that is new and far worse in many respects is that the United States has traditionally, in the face of these challenges, acted on the basis of what we think is right and good for the national interest and for our values. And you can agree or disagree with the politics or the policies of any particular administration. But the United States tried to be a force for stability, predictability, and good. Sometimes we succeeded, Mostly we succeeded. I think sometimes we failed. What's changed now, which is so disconcerting and depressing, is that with the leadership we now have in the White House, with the falsehoods told every day, with the undermining of our alliances and the elevation of our adversaries, we are now unpredictable. Nobody knows what the president's going to wake up and tweet. Are we going to have the Taliban at Camp David all of a sudden on 9/11? Are we going to be 10 minutes from launching a war with Iran? Are we going to withdraw our forces from Syria without any warning? We're exporting instability and unpredictability. And when the most important, most powerful country in the world is doing that, all these other challenges that we have faced consistently are much, much harder to deal with.
Last question for you. Thanksgiving's coming up. You know what it's like to mediate people and negotiate with people. You yourself have a little bit of a politically divided home. I want your advice on maybe how we should handle politics around the Thanksgiving table. How do you guys do it at home?
Well, I'm blessed to have two wonderful children, one of whom is quite conservative, the other of whom is quite progressive, and my husband and I are somewhere in between. And we've had the challenge of, when you disagree profoundly on policy issues or political issues, how do you cope? And what we've decided very deliberately and with a great deal of conviction is that what unites us as a family, our love, our background, our history, our shared hopes and dreams, much more important than these political divisions, which doesn't mean we don't disagree and argue, but it means at the end of the day, we're not going to let those divisions tear us apart. And I think that's, as hard as that is, that's what families need to try to do, even around the Thanksgiving dinner table, or maybe especially around the Thanksgiving dinner table. But it's also a metaphor, in my judgment, for what we have to do as a country. Because these same divisions, I believe, as I write in Tough Love in the last chapter, I believe are our biggest national security vulnerability right now. Because our adversaries, like Russia, see those divisions, and they're working every day to exacerbate them and turn Americans against each other. And if they're able to do that in a sustained and profound way, then they can weaken us, defeat us as a global rival without ever firing a bullet. So we've got to take this seriously, and we've got to be very deliberate and I lay out a number of proposed steps that we can take as individuals, collectively, as a body politic, to try to bridge those differences.
Ambassador Rice, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for joining us and thank Ambassador Susan Rice. From the Hotel Bennett in Charleston, I'm Gavin Jackson.